Thank you for that introduction. I can hardly wait to hear myself speak now. I do want to thank Ken. This certainly going to end up spilling all over my notes. So. But I want to thank you not just for sponsoring this is minor, but for introducing me to the dirty burger. I appreciate that. That's really so it is appropriate to be speaking about the subject of argument, hatred, etc. during this time. As you can see from my hirsute state, which I have not shaved for a while, because as Charles Dickens described the time of counting of the Omer between Pesach and Shavuot, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. No doubt what he's referring to. But the idea is that during this period of time, the Talmud tells us an extraordinary statement. It says that between Passover and Shavuot, just 49 days, it was during that time, Rabbi Akiva, great Talmudic sage, who is described as having 12,000 pairs of students. We'll talk about that a little bit. But 12,000 pairs of students, in other words, for the mathematically challenged, 24,000 students. And it says they all died during that period of time. It sounds like an exaggeration, I don't know, but let's say a lot of students died during the time. It's terrible. And the Talmud gives us a reason for it. Fascinating reason. The Talmud says, Shelo nahagu kavod zeh bazeh. They did not treat each other with appropriate respect. That's incredible. That's astounding. Here we have some of these students of the greatest rabbi of his time, Rabbi Akiva, right? And here are these thousands of students who are students of this great rabbi, and between this amazingly holy time, between the Exodus from Egypt, the celebration of the Exodus, and the celebration of the Torah given at Sinai, in that time, they died. Because Lo nahagu kavod, they didn't have appropriate honor. So it's an appropriate time to talk about respect and to talk about honor and so on. Secondly, the Talmud tells us that there was a difference. We had two destructions of the temple, the first temple, second temple. The Talmud says the first temple, we're pretty sure we know why it was destroyed. People were involved in three. There were people, I can't say everyone, but people were involved in, there was bloodshed, murder, there was sexual immorality, and there was idolatry. There was not a lot of good stuff, right? That's pretty bad. Those are the three groups, right? It was destroyed. But it says, the Talmud says that the second temple, during that time, Jews were not transgressing those three terrible sins. The Jews appeared to be okay in that area. So what was it that was the cause? The Talmud says hatred, baseless hatred. And one of the great rabbis of the 19th century, 20th century, early 20th century, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. So he comments on this and he says, I think the way it worked is like this. People were very devout, very religious, and very passionate. And he says, and someone who deviated slightly from what they believed to be the correct path, they would judge that person as being a heretic. They'd judge that person as being there's a technical term for this in Yiddish, an oisbarth, which is hard to translate, but it basically means he's out. Right. Forget this guy. And because of that, they rejected people. And the rejection of people came, so to speak, from a place of their feeling of righteousness, from a place of their feeling of being right. And hence they tended to reject each other. And that rejection, that's called baseless hatred. And that really, the Talmud says, was the cause of the destruction of the second temple. The Midrash tells us something else. It says that there were times in our history where the Jewish people worshipped idols. You look through the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, you will see places, times the Jews worshipped various idols in the land of Canaan, etc. But these times, there were some of those times when the Jews had tremendous success economically and militarily. Thomas says, but there were other times where the Jews were very unsuccessful in Israel militarily and economically. The Talmud says, the difference was when there was unity, when there was respect for each other and love for each other, we were successful even when we were worshipping idols. And when we didn't have love and respect for each other, we were unsuccessful even when we were apparently keeping the precepts of Judaism, keeping the precepts of the Torah. And this is not a supernatural thing necessarily. This is something natural. James Madison spoke about this, in which he said there is a tendency of people to be fractured, tendency of people to split apart, tendency of people to be totally involved in their own views. And he says, and part of the design of the American Constitution and the political system, which was very effective, I say was, hopefully it will continue to be, but it was very effective in hopefully getting people to slow down a bit, to contemplate things, not to be caught up in the passion of the moment and not to splinter into multiple groups. You need to have unity in order to have a nation. You need to have unity in order to have a society that can function. You need to have consideration and trust in each other. I come out of the subway in New York. Very often, this has happened to me numerous times, and I can't see the street signs, all the way down the block. And I'm saying, I'm wondering, is 85th Street that way or that way? You ever had that? I don't know. So I come out and I will ask the first person, I say, excuse me, is 85th Street that way? And New York's pretty good about this. They'll say, yeah, that direction. Now, I trusted that person. That involved trust. I don't assume that the person's some evil, satanic guy who's going to tell me, oh, it's that way, but it's really that way. No. You ask them, what time is it? Right? People do not lie about this, generally. Right? I actually I came out of New York, it was a snowy, there was a Madison Avenue. I've just given a lecture. I was carrying a projector, a screen, and a computer. And there had been freezing rain. You have no idea what that is. Thank God, right? But there was freezing rain covered by a layer of snow. There was no traction whatsoever. Being Australian, I ignore snow. So I walk out like that, and I start to slide. And I'm worried about, of course, my projector and also my spine. So I was, a fellow comes over and grabs me and stops me from falling. I said, well, thank you so much. He says, no problem. He says, can I help you carry your stuff to your car? So I said, well, thank you. Now, I haven't been in New York that long, so I still trust people to, right? So he said, yeah. So I said, yes. And he helped me carry the stuff to my car. We loaded into the car, just sweetest, nice guy ever. And he says, do you know how to get, you have a foreign accent, do you know your way around? Can I give you directions? This is before Waze, right? And I said, no, I'm fine, I've got a map, I'm good, thank you very much. And as he says, okay, drive safely, it's slippery. As he says goodbye, his jacket opens, and I see he is wearing a large medallion, which has got a pentagram on it, which is a satanic symbol. And around the pentagram, it says Church of Satan. And I said thank you to him again. And I said, really, thank you so much. And he said, oh, it's a pleasure. And I said, look, can I ask you something? He said, sure. I said, are you actually a member of the Church of Satan? And he said, yes, I am. I said, but you're so nice. He said, oh, I'm not religious. But we generally assume in society, in our normal interaction with other people, that they're not going to lie. They're not going to say, oh, it's 7 o'clock when it's really 8. They're not going to say that way is north when it's not. Society cannot exist if you don't have that mutual trust. If you don't have that, and that's something which is, unfortunately, is deteriorating. We are lacking a general trust. Another aspect of society, unity. To have a common narrative, common story, common beliefs, etc., common blood. Those are being corrupted. An amazing article by Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, I don't know how you pronounce it, in the Atlantic, about how algorithms, to a certain degree, are destroying that commonality and that trust. Why? You get onto a feed in your social media. So they've calculated that the reactions that get the most likes and the most shares are reactions which create the most emotion, anger, rage, indignation, etc. These get the most clicks, so the algorithms are designed to move that along. And not only that, but you are fed things which you like. So you're only hearing what? An echo box, the reinforcing of what you already believe. And this has fractured and disintegrated the commonality, the unity, and a lot of the trust that we have in society. So I can't tell you that we can, with this evening, change the whole world and society. That's not going to happen. But there's such a thing as former Chief Rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sachs, referred to as moral ecology. You probably know that in ecosystems, there are minor variations in one place and in one situation can cause massive impacts and have an impact. They call it the butterfly effect, where in a complex system, even a small change in a variable can produce massive change somewhere else. So a great man once said that when I was young, I thought I could change the world, and I realized that was not possible. He says, I decided maybe I can change my country. And I realized that's not, I got older, I realized that's not possible. And then I thought maybe I can change my city. I got older and I saw not possible. He says, when I got old enough, I realized that I can change myself. But if I change myself, that can have a ripple effect on my city, on my community, on my city, on my state, on my country, etc. And that's what we can do. I always think of this when I'm driving in New York, which is horrific, as I'm sure you know, a Malthusian struggle for survival, in which people would rather you die than merge. So I know that when I drive in New York, New Jersey, if someone puts on their blinker, the indicator, I always will signal them to merge, right? And sometimes they don't because they think it's an ambush or a trap or something. They don't trust me. Well, what's this guy doing? So, but I signal to merge, and I think to myself, the value of this is I've probably saved lives. Forget traffic, but I think I've saved lives. Because this guy, because he's able to merge, will not miss his exit, and he'll get to work on time in a good mood, and he won't yell at his personal assistant. And the personal assistant, who will not be yelled at that day, when he gets home, he won't yell at his kid. And then the kid won't get yelled at when he goes to school the next day. He won't bully the other kid in the playground. And the other kid won't get bullied in the playground. He will not grow up to be a serial killer. And so therefore, merely by letting someone merge, I have saved lives. But that is what we can do. And that's my aim, is that we can, at least in our own circle of influence, which usually is just yourself, but that circle of influence can have an influence on others, and that can progress. That's what that's what we're trying to do. So my father, Olav Shalom, was the Rabbi. He was that used to run the synagogue we went to, and he would assign seats to people on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the high holidays. And he would always, people who he knew were arguing with each other, hated each other, he'd always sit them next to each other. He knew, right, and it worked a lot of times, you're sitting next to someone in the synagogue for hours and hours, right, and you're reading prayers that say things like, forgive me, I've done, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully something will thaw out, which usually worked, aside from those few violent incidents. But in general, it was something that worked. So that's what we're trying to do, right, in this class. So So we started by telling you that indeed our sages pointed out that some of the worst things that have happened to the Jewish people happened as a result of baseless hatred, happened as a result of division, and this period of time called Spiras HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, which although was a wonderful and is a wonderful time of development of the Jewish people from physical freedom to spiritual goal, from Passover to Shavuot, was nevertheless a time that was tainted by avelut, by some level of mourning for the students of Rabbi Akiva and the lesson of lo nahagu kavod zeh b'zeh. But I should point out that on the other hand, the Torah does tell us that agreement is inevitable, absolutely inevitable. We know, for example, that in the book of Deuteronomy 17, we are told that when there will be, it says, when there will be a dispute, when people will argue about purity and impurity, about financial matters, about torts and damages and liabilities, etc. So the Torah sets up a system, it's a court system. From the very beginning of Judaism, we already had the anticipation that there would be arguments. I served in the Israeli army. I once asked one of my officers, I once asked him, I said, why, it's interesting in Israel, there's never been an attempt at a military coup. Even though there are thousands of people under arms, a huge army, why not? He says, in order to have a coup, you need to have at least 3 people who agree with each other. And indeed, Jews are to some degree famous for being somewhat argumentative. Disagree? Huh? So we are actually famous for being somewhat argumentative. It's interesting. I was speaking for some of the students here in the Torah Day School today for the middle school. So I was talking about synagogues in exotic locations that I've visited. So I mentioned about Senpo Sukihara, who was the great Japanese consul, the diplomat in Kaunas during the Second War, who saved the lives of probably about 3,000 to 5,000 Jews by giving them visas. It's an amazing man. His first encounter with Jews was a little kid from the Verhaftig family, was told by their parents to take an invitation to someone's house to invite them for a Hanukkah meal at the Verhaftig house. And the kid got the address wrong. And he turns up at the house of the Japanese consul general of Kaunas with a Hanukkah invitation. And he knocks on the door, and Sukihara opens the door. The kid had never seen an Asian in his life. He just stands there staring, and Sukihara says, what is it? And the kid just hands him the note, like he's figured, okay, Dad told me, so he gives him the note. And Sukihara and his wife turned up at the Hanukkah party. And in his diary, he notes 2 things that astounded him and that really just made an impression upon him about the Jews. 2 things at the Hanukkah party. And they were, A, how much they ate. B, how much they talked and argued. Like he'd never seen anything like this. In Japan, there's a certain reticence, it's sort of quiet. There's people massive arguments. That's what it was like. But the Torah tells us that there's an inevitable, and it's not just Jews, really everyone in the world, right? Because every person, every mind, because God created a system in which there should be free will. Free will involves and requires individuality, requires variation, requires that, and that means that my mind is going to see things differently than your mind. I'll be right, of course, but nevertheless, we see things differently. Especially even, people have pointed out that that even physical objects are seen differently by different people. Certainly, concepts, ideals, philosophy, etc. People look at things very differently. Right? And that's a good thing. There's a time we were talking about this today, but when you see a huge group of Jews, you see, let's say 100,000 Jews, a special blessing you make. You know what the blessing is? Blessed are you, our God, King of the universe, who is Chacham Harazim, the one who is wise about people's secrets. And the Talmud explains what that means. It says the following. It says that just as their faces are different from each other, their minds and their hearts are different from each other. So actually, it's interesting, we celebrate that fact. We say, blessed are you, God, that all these people, 100,000 people, they're all different. If you've been to Tanzania and you've seen the wildebeest migration of millions of wildebeests crossing it's not like you look at the wildebeest and say, look at the individuality of the thing. No, wildebeests, no offense to animals, but I mean, they're all the same. There's very little variation amongst the wildebeests crossing the plains of Tanzania. Humans, however, radically different. And by the way, humans who can be genetically the same can be radically different. You may know twins who are different, right? They look at things different. That's possible. Why not? And so, but I would say not only is disagreement inevitable, but it's also desirable. There's a fascinating story in Genesis, which is really difficult to understand. It's the story of the Tower of Babel. You may have heard of it. Tower of Babel, right? So in the Tower of Babel, what is this? It's interesting. It says all the people had safa achat, which means one language, probably Esperanto, right? Udvarim achadim, and same words. It says they had one language and the same words, same things, same words. And it says they got together to build a city and a tower in a valley. And then it says, and God said, I had better make sure that they don't succeed. I'm going to split up these people into language groups to make sure they cannot communicate. Otherwise, they will succeed in their plans. Now, I just pretty much quoted it. What was the sin? It doesn't say they did anything wrong. It says they spoke a common language. They spoke common words. They got together to build a city and a tower. And God says, oh, this is not good. I'm going to break them up so that they don't succeed. The plans don't come to fruition. But there's nothing in the text that seems to indicate what exactly they did wrong. And so the Netziv, again, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, he comes along and he says something amazing. He says this. He said, it says they had the same language, but it also says almost they had safa achat, that means same language, but then it says dvarim achadim, which means single, united, ideals. It's a strange, it seems like a repetition. They're the same. She says, huh? Achadim, yeah, but in this case, they all had the same. The problem, you know what the problem was? The Tzif says this, the problem was they all said the same things, all thought the same things, and all did the same thing. They were all exactly the same. That was the problem. That was the problem. God said, oh, this is not good. I want humans to be different. I want humans to be individuals. I want humans not to just sound the same and repeat the same things and say the same thing. I want there to be variation. He says, so therefore, he split up the languages to force these people into a situation where they were different. So the sin of the Tower of Babel was actually unity taken too far. It was unity that was turning into uniformity. Uniformity is not what is wanted here. Unity is a good thing. Uniformity, in which everyone's sameness, everyone has to be the same, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. And that's what the Tower of Babel was type of breaking up that situation so that because as the Netziv puts it, he says God wanted people to have pursued ideals, right? See things in their own way. That's actually a good thing. So there's a positive component in this agreement. And we know in the very beginning of the Torah, earlier than the Tower of Babel, we are told that God originally created the human being as both male, female combined. He then split that unit into two, into the male part and the female part. And then God said, when he described the male and female relationship, he uses the term ezer kenegdo, an opposing helper. Adam and Eve, so opposing helper. Now, if you're helping, you're not opposing. If you're opposing, you're not helping. I remember when I used to do repairs around my kids were little, right? So one of my kids who really loved like using tools and stuff like that, he actually does construction in the summers. So he's married, kids. But anyway, so he does construction. He learns in Kollel during the year. He does construction in the summer. Great. So he used to come and say, so if I was repairing something in the house, he would come and say, other help, and he'd take out his toy toolkit and he'd come and help me. He slowed me down about 10 times, like literally, right? When Shmuley would help me, that would slow me down because he was an opposing helper. He'd like, every time I hit the nail, he wants to hit it with his plastic hammer and so on and so forth. And he would imitate me, he'd hit his thumb and he'd start cursing. Not good, right? Anyway, so you know, my wife would say, where did you learn that? So he says, other. So if you're opposing, you're not helping. If you're helping, you're not opposing. How do we understand that? So I think the answer is, you know, Stephen Jay Gould, famous evolutionary biologist, Harvard University, passed away a while ago. But Stephen Jay Gould, in one of his books called The Panda's Thumb. And in The Panda's Thumb, he uses this as an argument against God. I don't think it's a valid argument. He says this, the panda's thumb is pretty useless for anything except one thing. The only thing a panda can do with its thumb is, what can a panda do with its thumb? Peel bamboo. That's it. It's useless for anything else. He says, now, if this was designed, wouldn't you expect a Swiss Army thumb? It can do all of those stuff with it. The panda's got this lousy thumb, all it can do. So I'm thinking to myself, what an idiot. Right? All the panda needs is a thumb that can peel bamboo. Pandas are pretty happy. You ever seen a sad panda? I mean, seriously? Is there any YouTube video with depressed pandas? No, right? All they need is to peel bamboo. Now, the difference between the panda, one of the differences between a panda thumb and a human thumb is what we call an opposable thumb. Right, it comes from the opposite direction. I can do all types of things with my thumb. The space bar, texting, what do they do with the thumb before we have phones? People walking around for like 50,000 years. And then somebody invented phones. They go, oh, cool. Right, but the thumb is not. Now, the greatest help that my fingers have is the thumb coming from the opposite direction. That's the greatest help. The greatest help you can have in life is someone who has a different perspective than you, and you integrate the two perspectives. The husband and the wife, the man and the woman, have different perspectives on things. They have different ways of processing information. They have different ways of expressing information. You know, I don't like talking that much, right? Except when I'm paid to, right? So, you know, man comes downstairs, says, you know, I told my wife, I feel I should have more, like, just man days. So what do you mean? Where I don't really have to schmooze and talk. I can just say, man, one egg. He says, yeah. I said, like, just once a week or something. He said, you're already way over the quota. But there is this idea that the azer connector, I mean, the opposing help, means sometimes the greatest help I can have in life is to have someone give me a different perspective, an opposing perspective. Now, that's useless if I ignore it. It's useless if I don't respect it. It's useless if I reject it. But if I have someone who I love and respect, and she gives me an opposite perspective on what mine is, then the sum total will be a much better stereoscopic view of life. That is the Azer Connect. Someone has an opposing view. I mentioned, gave a class this afternoon in the college. So I mentioned there was an Israeli secular historian who pointed out that there were approximately 30 false messiahs in Jewish history. People who claimed to be the Messiah. You've heard of Shabtai Tzvi, Brian, whatever, various others, right? So you had various false messiahs in Jewish history, about 30 of them. And this Israeli historian pointed out, he said that about 90% of them were single men, not married. He said, why? He said, because, you know, a guy is not married, he can look at the mirror and look at himself and say, yeah, I think I might be the Messiah. If he's married, he comes downstairs in the morning and says, honey, I think I might be the Messiah. I was like, you idiot. Take out the garbage, please. Messiah. Anyway, so this just doesn't work. That is actually great help, right? That could have saved a lot of tragedy in history had these false messiahs been married early. You know what I mean? Seriously. Shabtai Tzvi didn't have a normal marriage. So Ezer Kenegov, but you see, that perspective that my wife has, that perspective the husband has, those different perspectives can only work if there is what? Kavod, honor, respect. Love is not enough for that. You can love someone and not respect them. You can respect someone and not love them. So there's love and respect, but the other point of view, very important here. And it's absolutely amazing. You know, there is a story. There were two rabbis who were great friends. The Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, long story about how they got to know each other. Reish Lakish ended up being his brother-in-law, Rabbi Yochanan's brother-in-law, but they were close friends. Reish Lakish, when Reish Lakish passed away, Rabbi Yochanan was distraught. He was beside himself. They studied together for years, and he was crying and inconsolable. So the other rabbis in the academy said, we need to do something. We need to help him out. We need to replace. So they chose the smartest, sharpest guy in the academy, Elazar ben Padat. And they had him sit with Rabbi Yochanan when Rabbi Yochanan was studying. So he would be the intellectual equal of Reish Lakish. He was a brilliant man. So the Talmud says this: every time Rabbi Yochanan said something, Rabbi Elazar ben Padat would say, yes, you know what? And I have evidence, I have proof for what you're saying. And he'd bring in proof for what we're saying. Rabbi Yochanan burst into tears. He said, I don't need you to agree with me. When I had Reish Lakish, my friend, I would say something, he would bring 24 refutations of my view. He would show me 25 proofs of why I'm wrong. And then I would argue back with 24 refutations of his refutation. He says, that's what I want. I don't need someone to nod and say, oh, you're so right. It's so correct. That's what you get, right? You want likes, right? Say something that'll spark people's emotion. You know, you get a lot of likes, certain things you can say on social media, LinkedIn, whatever it is, right? You get lots of likes and shares, etc. Not because it's true, but because it makes you popular and people, right? So Rabbi Yochanan he didn't want someone to agree with him. He wanted Reish Lakish. You know, I was in South Korea 2 years ago, about 3 years ago. So ran a tour of South Korea and Japan. So South Korea is a wonderful place, fascinating. So I have two friends in Seoul. One is the Israeli ambassador to South Korea, who's in yeshiva with me on Kibbutz Torah. He gives a Chumash class on South Korean television every Friday, which they love. And my other friend there is Jung Minho, who actually has a doctorate in Jewish philosophy from Yeshiva University. We were in class together, and he lives there in Seoul. So I let Jung know that I was doing a tour. I was getting in 2 days early for the tour. So I was speaking in South Africa. I came from South Africa to Korea. The only flight, whatever, it was a weird flight. So I had to go through China. I almost got arrested. You know, at the airport, I had all these guidebooks with me for South Korea and Japan. Books that I put together of sources, the classes I was giving. So one of the books, in one of the pages, it had all stuff about the Jewish dateline, halachic dateline. So I had maps of China, Taiwan, South Korea, etc., etc. So I have 50 of these books, my tour group. So I come to the airport in I forgot where it was, in China, and the customs guy opens it up, and he looks at the book, and he opens it up at that page. Now they get very sensitive about Taiwan and North and South Korea, and he says, what's this? I try to explain to him halachic dateline, keeping Shabbat, because it's like. So I said, I'm a tour guide. He said, can you prove you're a tour guide? I said, yeah. So I had a cap with me, which says, Rabbi Becher, Legacy Kosher Tourist. So I took out the cap, put it on, he looks at me and says, okay. So I got to Korea, I got to Seoul 2 days early. So I told Jung ahead of time that I'd be in Seoul, I'd have 2 days. So he said, great. He says he got a group of his friends together, educators. He's a bunch of educators. We went to Gangnam, which is a suburb of Seoul. Gangnam, yes, the Gangnam style. I did not know. Yeah. Right, but it's a suburb of South Korea, of Seoul. So they asked me to give a lecture on the Jewish method of study, Chavruta study. What's Chavruta? Chavruta it's Aramaic. It means chaver, a friend. Right? How do we study? How have Jews been studying in yeshivas from time immemorial? How did I describe Rabbi Akiva's students? Did the Talmud describe them as 24,000 students? No. How did the Talmud describe them? 12,000 pairs, correct. Right? They were Chavruta. They studied in pairs. And there was a fascinating, in the Journal of Problem-Based Learning, 2019, there was a study that was done in Samyuk University, Republic of Korea, called The Effects of a Chavruta Method on Self-Directed Learning and Learning Motivation. And in this South Korean university, they did an extensive study of Chavruta learning. They came to the conclusion, and also the American Behavioral Science Research Institute, 2013, had a similar study. They came to the conclusion that the rate of memory formation in the brain and understanding things, right? The results that lecture explanations were the worst, 5%. Reading, 10%, audiovisual, 20%, demonstration, 30%. The best results came from discussion. Teaching in an interactive format, Chavruta study. And Chavruta study forms the basis of Jewish study. That's how we study. You study with another person. Why? Like Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. If I assert that this is what I think the Talmud means, and my Chavruta just says, okay, we're not making progress here. If my Chavruta says, are you foolish? You cannot read Hebrews from right to left, right? It says this is what it means. I say, well, no, we argue about it. That's actually a good thing. Because what that means is the clash of the intellects, the clash of the opinions and the perspectives will come to a better understanding of the subject matter, a better understanding of the text. So I was talking to this group in South Korea about the Chavruta study, but I said to them, it won't work in South Korea. I said, you want to institute this in schools? It will not work. They said, why not? I said, because you are way too polite. If someone disagrees with you, oh, interesting. I said, when two Jews get together, I mean, the worst case scenario is I say something, right? The other person's just waiting for his turn. He's not listening, just waiting for his turn, right? It's like I don't know, when I sometimes do lectures, I say, I'm happy to take questions now, but no Jewish questions. A definition of a Jewish question, you give your own speech and just raise the tone a little bit at the end so it sounds like a question. A Jewish question. But it is actually, it's actually to be combative in that way is actually a good thing. Because the intellectual, and that has been suppressed to a great degree in our society. If you say something, a professor might say something in a lecture and disagree and note that it's wrong, and social media goes wild, he'll lose his job. People have been driven to suicide. Someone makes a stupid joke, right? Granted, people do stupid jokes all the time, right? And he makes a stupid joke, he'll lose his livelihood. A person, like, there's no toleration for anything which is slightly out of my box, slightly out of it. There's been a suppression of this type of debate, a suppression of this type of free exchange of ideas in the places where it's most important, i.e. schools, universities, etc. A friend of mine is a lecturer, used to teach at Johns Hopkins. So he gave a class, it was a public class. He was a professor of philosophy, and it was a public class, and there was a charge for it. Anyway, and in the middle of the class, the person in the front row gets up, right? Says, I'm leaving, publicly, and walks out and demands her money back. So the person who was collecting the money gave her money back. She said, why are you leaving? She said, I came here to be educated, and I did not like what I heard. Now, let's analyze that. What, in her mind, what is education? Hearing things that I like, meaning that I already know and I agree with. Hearing something which makes me a little uncomfortable, oh. Hearing something I don't like, oh, right? And when people do hear something they don't like, when hear someone criticizing slightly, what is that person accused of? Namophobia, transphobic, homophobic, racist, anti-black, anti-white, it's like, name something. It's insane, right? You cannot have a dissenting voice. And that's true both on the extreme of the right and the extreme of the left. The extreme right will suppress any dissent from their messianic cult, right? And on the extreme left will also suppress any dissent. It's horrifying. And a person will be skewered darts shot at them, right? The little comments here and there, etc. And people's lives can be destroyed. People will be driven to suicide from this type of stuff. And what's even worse is people shoot darts into their own brains. Because if you are not in a situation where you cannot hear an opposing view, how could you possibly even consider that your own view is true? If you're not in a situation where you're not prepared to listen, you're not prepared to debate, and that's a necessary thing. And throughout Jewish history has been Rabbi Sachs described Talmud as the longest conversation in history. It really is. You go back to Mount Sinai, God said A, and then he explained it. And then it's explained further. And then two people said, whoa, does that mean this? Does that mean that? And then there's debates about it. And the debates are recorded in the Talmud. And the heated debates recorded in the Talmud. And then there are different explanations all around the side. Rashi, Troyes in France, 11th century, his grandchildren also in France, etc. And they're debating these same points. And then you look further around and you've got points debated by people a little further down the line and so on and so forth, and the debates still continue. That's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as there's respect, there were two great sages, Shammai and Hillel. Shammai and Hillel had three arguments. They only argued about three things. Their students had approximately 225 arguments. The schools of Shammai, the schools of Hillel, that lasted for quite a number of years after Shammai and Hillel, maybe over 100 years. They had many, many debates. What's interesting is the Talmud says two things about them. A few things. It says, number one of the debates, those who are studying Daf Yomi, the Talmud tractate Yevamot, deals with lots of incestuous, adulterous, and all types of relationships, sexual morality, etc. It's a R-rated tractate. But basically, it deals with lots of different bizarre, relationships, etc. And one of the relationships, according to Beit Shammai, is permitted. According to Beit Hillel, is prohibited. That would mean that the person born of that relationship is illegitimate. According to Beit Hillel, according to Beit Shammai, not. The Talmud says, despite the fact that they argue about certain relationships, very serious consequences to things like incest and adultery, it's had very serious consequences. Even though they argue with each other, they would marry women from each other's schools. Why? I mean, they didn't compromise their view. They didn't say, you know what, all's fair in love and marriage. No, that's not what they said. But they trusted the other to say, listen, I wouldn't suggest it because according to you, right, this family is not right. In other words, they trusted each other. They respected each other enough. They respected their views. They warned them. Talmud also says that there was one debate they had, which was a 3.5-year debate. That's incredible, 3.5 years. And it says eventually it was resolved in favor of the house of Hillel. Heavenly voice, Hillel's right. So the Talmud says, why is halacha, Jewish law, in accordance with the house of Hillel? I'm not going to get into this whole issue that they were the majority, even though Shammai was sharper, more intellectually astute. So do you go by quality or quantity, etc.? There's many debates about that. But at the end of the day, the Talmud says because Hillel, the house of Hillel, were humble, and when they presented their view, they also would present the view of Shammai, the opposing view. And not only would they present the view of Shammai, but they present the view of Shammai first. So they're presenting their view, and they also present their opposing view, but they presented the opposing view first. That's why they had the merit to have halacha decided in accordance with them. And indeed, the Maharal of Prague, so he says, because you see, reality is never just homogeneous. Reality has different perspectives. He says there is no thing, there is nothing which is totally 100% pure, and there's nothing which is totally 100% impure. Example, if I would ask a Jewish audience, is pig pure or impure? Tamei, tahor. What would you say? Tamei, and you are correct. You're not allowed to eat it. However, can you use pig bristles for a hairbrush?
Yes.
Yeah, 100% you can. Right? Could you use pig bristles for a pastry brush?
No.
Yes, you can. My wife would throw me out of the kitchen if I did, but you can. Halachically, it is permitted. So yeah, the pig is impure, but there are components of it which are actually okay. Right? It's not like we're not pig haters. Actually, au contraire. I mean, I think pigs' greatest friends are the Jewish people. Right? We don't eat them. If a pig's escaping from a farm, it's going to run towards a Jew. Save me. So, and what about? So, how about a sheep? Is a sheep pure or impure? Yeah. Pure animal. Can eat lamb. However, can you eat the sciatic nerve of the lamb? No, prohibited. Can you eat the fat around the kidneys of the lamb? No, prohibited. Can you eat the blood of the lamb? No, prohibited. So it's not completely, neither is completely pure or completely impure. No? The Maharal is making an interesting point. What he's saying is, depends on your perspective. If you're looking at the pig in the sense of eating food, then yeah, it's impure. If you're looking at it in the sense of use of it, benefit from it, can you get benefit from it? You can get benefit from it. Could you get benefit from bread 2 weeks ago? No. Right? You cannot. Right? 2 weeks ago? How long ago was it? I'm trying to remember. A week and a half. Okay, well, it's not that long. Okay. You have to sell it. Can't remember. So there is this idea that he says a person needs, and we need to recognize that even if a view which I disagree with, which is most views, but even if the view which I disagree with, we have to understand there could be some elements of truth in that. And there could be some, and if I understand see, why is it that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, they could argue about some very serious cases with some very serious consequences, and yet, and I say I'm going over time, so I'm going to end soon, and yet they were able to love each other, because it says the following, the verse quoted, it says, Ha'emet v'hashalom ahevu, they love truth and peace. Notice the order. They love truth and peace. They both recognize that each one was trying for the truth. And therefore, when you recognize that this person's trying for truth, he may have failed. I don't think he is. That doesn't mean I have to agree with everything everyone says, but I have to understand that a lot of people are trying and striving to get the truth. If I understand that, then I can love that person, and I can love peace and have peace as well. Rav Kook points out something which is a very famous verse we say, which is it says this: Yi shalom b'chelech, let there be peace in your dwellings. Shalva ba'aronotayich, right? So it says v'rav shalom banayich, and let there be abundant peace amongst your children. The word rav, abundant, is different than the word gadol. Gadol means one thing which is great. Rav is from the Hebrew word harbeh, which means many things. The difference is, he says, peace is not by having one thing which is great, everyone's exactly the same, thinking the same thing. There was a song I learned when I was a kid in the 60s. Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky, and anyone know that one? Right, and the children go to school, and they go to university, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same. There's a green one, and a blue one, and a pink one, and a yellow one. They're all made out of ticky-tacky, and it's a great song. I remember it from 4th grade, something like that. In any case, right, that song is what Rav Kook is saying is not the right thing. That's not what we want. The type of peace we want is where we recognize that the other person is striving for truth. They may not have got to it. It doesn't require that I agree with everyone. But my pursuit of truth is actually aided by the other person's disagreement with me in it. In the same way as in a marriage, the ideal marriage, like mine, right, where you have the situation where it's the opposition, but there is the respect and there is the love. When I have respect for the other person and understand that they are trying to get to the truth, and we're probably trying to make a better world, etc., then I'm able to, even if I vehemently disagree, and sometimes you can. A friend of mine took his mother, who was a professor of law, to see a yeshiva in Israel called Mir Yeshiva. So about 1,000 guys sitting there in the study hall, and what are they doing? They're screaming at each other because they're chavrusas. They're studying together, right? So she's a law professor. She's used to the law library. All you can hear is the suction of the donut coming out of the coffee. That's it. Occasional sobbing. Right? That's it. She comes, she looks out, she sees, and she says to my friend, she says, Dobby, why do they all hate each other? And he said, actually, they're the best of friends. Usually, chavrusas who spend a lot of the day arguing with each other vehemently are actually the best of friends. And indeed, that comes because they both recognize there's a pursuit of truth, there is respect for each other, and there is a love for each other. If we can somehow, within our own small circles, cultivate an understanding that the other person may be misguided, but they're trying for the truth, maybe I can help them. Maybe they can help me. Maybe I'm not right. Right? At least not me, the rest of you. Right? But maybe I'm not right. Right? And then we can hopefully make a little bit of an impact in our own small circles. And hopefully through that, they'll have a moral ecological effect on the rest of the world and make a great impact where we can hope to have a world, Barav Shalom Banayich, where there is a peace which comes not from Tower of Babel, oneness, uniformity, but a peace that comes even when there are differences. And that's really what we hope to strive for in Jewish tradition. Thank you very much.